Lorenzo Adams sat at the kitchen table, a thin beam of evening light casting long shadows across the floor of his modest Richmond home. The hum of the refrigerator mingled with the scratch of his pencil on paper as he rehearsed his debate arguments silently. At 17, he was meticulous, polite, and quietly determined, traits instilled by his mother, Denise, a pediatric surgeon whose long shifts left little time for leisure. His father, Raymond, worked in Washington, D.C. Often unreachable, his presence felt only in framed photographs on the walls and brief phone calls. Despite the absence, Lorenzo's world was structured, predictable, and safe. That Friday evening, Lorenzo helped Mrs. Coleman, his elderly neighbor, carry groceries inside. He pocketed a piece of butterscotch candy she offered with a smile and sent a quick text to his best friend, Terrence Cole, movie marathon tonight, bringing chips. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and cooling charcoal, a routine night filled with laughter and adolescent plans. Yet just 6 blocks from home, the ordinary would fracture. Headlights split the calm. A patrol car rolled past slowly, then reversed. Red and blue lights flared, bathing the boys in harsh illumination. Officer Dale Granger approached, white, mid-30s, buzz-cut gleaming under the street lamp. His presence exuded authority and danger. "Where you two headed?" he demanded. Lorenzo responded calmly, giving precise answers, knowing the importance of words in moments like this. Granger's eyes, cold and unyielding, scanned them, then fixed on Lorenzo. "You match a description." That was all. No details, no probable cause, only accusation. IDs were demanded. Lorenzo complied. Terrence faltered. Terrence was ordered to sit on the curb. His sneakers scraped the concrete as fear rendered him motionless. Lorenzo was instructed to face the patrol car, hands on the hood, legs spread. Every nerve screamed caution. A Swiss Army knife, a birthday gift from his grandfather, was discovered in Lorenzo's backpack and misrepresented as a deadly weapon. In moments, Lorenzo was handcuffed, Terrence injured, 2 teenagers ensnared by the system's indifference and a misapplied law. At the station, Lorenzo's world contracted. Concrete walls, steel doors, fluorescent lights humming like trapped insects. Requests to call his mother went unanswered for hours. The knife, the ID, the debate notebook, all rendered him a suspect in a system more concerned with procedure than truth. Armed robbery charges replaced suspicion, and the wheels of justice began grinding with ruthless efficiency. Bail denied, a public defender assigned for 12 minutes of consultation, Lorenzo's innocence became irrelevant in a courtroom that moved faster for punishment than for fairness. Trial and conviction followed swiftly. No witnesses called, no evidence presented, surveillance footage ignored. 12 minutes of defense led to life without parole. Denise screamed in anguish. Lorenzo, silent and broken, absorbed the weight of a life stolen by negligence and systemic bias. The courtroom, mostly empty, witnessed the quiet destruction of a boy who had only walked to buy snacks. The judge, Harold Whitfield, enforcer of rigid order, remained unmoved, a symbol of entrenched disparity and racial inequity. 3 weeks earlier, Lorenzo's life had been ordinary, structured, filled with love and learning. Now the system had reduced him to an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Every interaction, every procedural shortcut compounded the injustice. Yet the story was not yet complete. The ordinary world would collide with authority in a way that would challenge every assumption, revealing the fragile veneer of a system that often prioritized power over justice. In that moment, the tension was palpable. A single intervention could change everything, a truth waiting just beyond the courtroom doors. The courthouse loomed over Lorenzo, cold stone steps leading up to doors that had never welcomed him. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh, buzzing overhead as if mocking the tension in the air. His mother, Denise, clutched the armrest of the pew, knuckles white, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. The assigned public defender, Neil Dawson, had met Lorenzo for only 12 minutes before trial. He seemed distracted, flipping through files with a coffee stain on his tie, eyes not meeting Lorenzo's, voice monotone as he promised to do his best. 12 minutes of hope stretched impossibly thin. The prosecutor, Brenda Hollis, moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to victories. Her eyes swept over the courtroom, noting the minimal presence of spectators, the lack of concern for the young man on trial. She presented the case with precision, highlighting a Swiss Army knife and a vague description from a robbery report. She did not reference the surveillance footage that proved Lorenzo innocent. She did not question the legality of the stop or search. She did not need to. The courtroom operated like a machine. Outcomes mattered more than truth. Lorenzo listened, heart hammering, as the evidence was stacked against him. He remembered his debate lessons: choose words carefully, remain calm, observe and respond. Yet here, every word felt meaningless. The system had already decided, the process a formality masking predetermined judgment. He imagined the life he had known just weeks before: evenings spent with Terence, helping neighbors, reading about civil rights, dreaming of debate championships. Each memory felt fragile, as though someone had placed it on a shelf of glass that could shatter at any moment. Neil Dawson's closing argument lasted 2 minutes. 2 minutes for a 17-year-old facing life without parole. He spoke with mechanical brevity, touching neither on evidence nor procedure. Lorenzo sat, wrists aching from cuffs that had been tight since his arrest, staring straight ahead. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, returning a verdict that felt almost like a punctuation mark. Guilty. The words echoed in the room, bouncing off the cold walls. Denise let out a sound somewhere between a scream and a sob, her maternal heart breaking in front of strangers who did not care. Outside, Richmond's streets carried on obliviously. Lights flickered on, sirens occasionally pierced the night air. The crickets continued their chorus. For Lorenzo, the world had narrowed to the orange jumpsuit, the buzz of fluorescent lights, and the weight of injustice pressing on his chest. His father, Raymond, still trapped in D.C. on a federal assignment, unaware of the storm consuming his son's life, seemed miles away, both physically and emotionally. Each hour that passed was an additional testament to the system's disregard for urgency, for fairness, for humanity. The detention facility became Lorenzo's world, a place of concrete walls, thin sheets, and endless fluorescent lights. He stared at the ceiling, thumb pressing into his palm, trying to remind himself he was real. He was alive. Every sound, every voice behind steel doors was a reminder of isolation and vulnerability. The debate notebook, soaked and torn by Officer Granger's contemptuous handling, lingered in his thoughts. He wondered if Terence had rescued it, if any of his words had survived the damp sidewalk. Each reflection was a thread connecting him to the life that existed outside these walls, a life now suspended in uncertainty. Meanwhile, the evidence that could have exonerated him existed somewhere in a convenience store surveillance system, untouched, ignored. Officer Granger's report, false and self-serving, had made its way through the system, condemning a boy who had done nothing. Prosecutor Hollis pressed forward, a conviction rate her measure of success, unconcerned with the child's innocence. The machine of justice moved swiftly, coldly, its teeth sinking into Lorenzo's adolescence. Each decision, each procedural misstep compounded the injustice, leaving a 17-year-old boy to confront a world where fairness was optional and power dictated outcomes. Yet beneath the despair, a tension lingered, subtle but persistent. Something unaccounted for had the potential to disrupt the carefully constructed sequence of authority. The ordinary, the overlooked, the small details, the surveillance footage, the truth, waited like a seed, ready to challenge the system. In the quiet moments, Lorenzo imagined what could happen if someone in a position of influence intervened. If the scales of justice tilted, even slightly. That possibility, faint yet insistent, carried the story forward into the unknown, hinting at a reckoning yet to come. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was filled with the quiet hum of tension. Lorenzo, thinner and more haunted, sat in his orange jumpsuit, wrists still bruised from handcuffs that had been too tight and too long. Judge Harold Whitfield adjusted his glasses and began speaking, his voice a rehearsed measure of authority. The words landed like cold stones: life without parole. Denise gasped, the sound swallowed in the cavernous room. Her son, 17, was being sentenced for a crime he did not commit, and the machinery of the court moved without regard. Lorenzo's father, Raymond Adams, arrived at the courthouse later that morning, informed belatedly by staff unable to penetrate the layers of bureaucracy surrounding his federal assignment. A man used to authority, Raymond understood the weight of this moment instantly. He observed the scene in silence, the courtroom unaware of the storm about to break. The father's eyes locked on his son, seeing the toll of unjust confinement etched in the hollows of a young face that should have been untouched by this cruelty. 3 weeks earlier, Lorenzo had been ordinary, his days filled with debate practice, neighborly acts, and adolescent routines. That life seemed light years away. The abrupt shift from normalcy to entrapment revealed the fragility of order, the ease with which power can override reason. Every step that led Lorenzo to this point, the patrol stop, the illegal search, the fabricated report, the public defender's haste, was a stitch in the fabric of systemic failure. At the detention center, fluorescent lights buzzed continuously. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat, suffocating yet familiar after weeks of confinement. Lorenzo pressed his thumbnail into his palm, a tactile reminder of his existence as he replayed the events leading to his arrest. The convenience store footage, untouched by the system, remained a silent witness to the truth, a truth that had yet to intersect with the court's narrative. Each passing hour deepened the chasm between innocence and punishment, a gap measured in bureaucracy, neglect, and racial bias. Raymond, understanding the stakes, began quietly preparing for intervention. The surveillance tape, Officer Granger's body cam, and the report discrepancies became threads in a web that could unravel the courtroom's verdict. The system had moved swiftly against his son, but it had not anticipated a father with both authority and resolve entering its orbit. As the sentencing hearing progressed, every official present felt the weight of procedural formality, unaware that the equilibrium was about to shift drastically. The courtroom's atmosphere was dense, filled with the low murmur of staff and the occasional shuffle of papers. Brenda Hollis, the prosecutor, exuded confidence, unaware that the meticulously gathered evidence of Lorenzo's innocence existed beyond her reach. Neil Dawson, the public defender, avoided eye contact, his detachment a symptom of systemic overload rather than malice. Lorenzo remained still, his body tense yet compliant, the embodiment of restraint imposed by fear and circumstance. Outside the walls, Richmond's streets hummed with normalcy. Lights flickered on in suburban homes, cars passed with predictable monotony, and life carried on as though the machinery inside the courthouse was an invisible aside. The tension between the city's ordinary rhythms and the courtroom's extraordinary injustice mirrored the fragility of trust in systems designed to protect. Yet in this disparity lay the seed of disruption, waiting for someone capable of bridging authority, truth, and moral courage. The story's momentum leaned toward confrontation, the potential for reckoning building as Lorenzo's fate hung precariously in balance. The morning of the sentencing arrived, heavy with the scent of anticipation and dread. Lorenzo sat quietly, his shoulders slumped, wrists still aching from the handcuffs that had left purples and yellows on his skin. Denise held her son's hand tightly, whispering words of comfort that felt powerless against the machinery of the courtroom. The air was thick with tension, every eye in the room awaiting the judge's words. Judge Harold Whitfield cleared his throat and spoke of the decay of values, the necessity of punishment, and the example that must be set. Each phrase landed like a stone, deliberate and unyielding, sentencing a boy whose only crime was being at the wrong place at the wrong time. The courtroom reacted with a collective intake of breath. Prosecutor Brenda Hollis paused, pen slipping from her fingers, the gravity of the sentence shaking her even if she refused to acknowledge it aloud. Lorenzo's lips moved silently, trying to speak, but the cage of injustice held his words captive. The bailiff approached to remove him, but the room's dynamic shifted abruptly. The double doors at the back slammed open, drawing every gaze. A tall, commanding figure entered, Raymond Adams, his presence radiating authority and determination. Flanked by aides and a state trooper, his steps echoed on the marble floor like a gavel strike. Raymond's eyes locked onto his son. For a fleeting moment, composure cracked, revealing the raw weight of a father witnessing his child's life nearly destroyed. He addressed the judge with measured precision, introducing himself as the Attorney General and declaring that the boy sentenced to life without parole was his son. Silence enveloped the courtroom. The judge's face drained of color, his hands trembling, authority faltering under the weight of truth. Every participant, prosecutor, public defender, bailiffs, clerks, paused, witnessing the disruption of an unchallenged system. Raymond presented evidence, surveillance footage showing the actual perpetrator, body cam recordings proving an illegal stop and search, and a fabricated arrest report. Each item dismantled the narrative that had condemned Lorenzo. He confronted the prosecutor, promising that her misconduct would face review, and reminded the judge that sentencing a child based on false evidence was malice, not procedure. The courtroom, once mechanical in its function, felt human again, tense and charged with the possibility of rectifying the injustice. Lorenzo's body finally allowed him to release the tension. He collapsed into his father's arms, tears breaking the quiet restraint he had maintained for weeks. Denise joined, wrapping her arms around both, and together they formed a shield against the cruelty that had nearly destroyed him. The gavel came down, not in authority but in panic, signaling recess. Judge Whitfield retreated, flustered and shaken, as the courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs of astonishment. The presence of a powerful advocate had changed the course of events instantaneously, revealing how fragile the system could be when confronted with undeniable truth and influence. The sun outside greeted Lorenzo as he stepped from the courthouse, the light warm against his battered face. For the first time in weeks, he breathed freely, absorbing the sense of cut grass and sun-warmed concrete. Reporters clamored, microphones pushed forward, cameras flashing, yet Lorenzo remained silent. His father spoke on his behalf, assuring the world that the system had failed, but reforms would follow. In these moments, the narrative shifted from despair to hope, from suppression to accountability, illustrating that intervention, courage, and truth could prevail even in the face of entrenched injustice. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of the courtroom confrontation began to unfold. Officer Dale Granger's personnel file was examined, revealing a history of 14 complaints for racial profiling and misuse of authority, all dismissed as unsubstantiated. Judge Harold Whitfield's sentencing records over 28 years were scrutinized, exposing a pattern where black defendants received sentences 2.4 times longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Prosecutor Brenda Hollis's files revealed suppression of exculpatory evidence, including the surveillance footage that could have exonerated Lorenzo. And the public defender, Neil Dawson, though not malicious, was overwhelmed, handling over 200 active cases simultaneously. The system itself had facilitated the injustice, not just its participants. Vivian Cross, appointed as special prosecutor, moved quickly. She demanded accountability and transparency, bringing the mismanagement and misconduct into sharp relief. The media picked up the story, investigative journalists highlighting the miscarriage of justice and the resilience of Lorenzo Adams. Public outrage intensified, protests forming outside the courthouse, high school students organizing rallies, and the narrative spreading nationwide through social media. For the first time, the failures of the justice system were confronted in a way that could not be ignored. The legal repercussions were swift. Granger was indicted on multiple counts of civil rights violations, falsifying evidence, and unlawful searches. The jury convicted him on all charges, and he was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, banned permanently from law enforcement. Brenda Hollis was disbarred for misconduct, and Neil Dawson resigned quietly after systemic audits highlighted the impossibility of providing adequate defense under current caseloads. Judge Whitfield was removed from the bench, a rare rebuke of judicial authority, with a federal investigation launched into his tenure. Meanwhile, Lorenzo began rebuilding his life. The surveillance footage confirmed the identity of the real robber, who was arrested weeks after Lorenzo's release. The executive orders, signed by Governor Patricia Ellis, mandated reforms: independent review of all Whitfield sentences, mandatory inclusion of body camera footage, maximum caseload limits for public defenders, and mandatory racial bias training for sitting judges. The first wave of reopened cases led to the release of 6 wrongfully imprisoned men. The impact of one father's intervention cascaded through the system, showing the potential for accountability when power and moral courage intersect. At home, spring had arrived. Dogwoods bloomed along Lorenzo's street, petals drifting like confetti. He sat on the same porch where he had once helped Mrs. Coleman, notebook in lap, reflecting on the journey that had nearly destroyed him. He had returned to school, quieter, more reflective, and determined to advocate for justice. The lessons of the courtroom, the detention center, and the systemic failures became the foundation for his growth, shaping his commitment to law and equity. Lorenzo competed in the state debate championship, speaking from personal experience about the presumption of innocence and racial justice. His composure, voice, and insight won first place, a symbolic reclamation of agency and voice. His mother, Denise, watched in tears, while Raymond observed with quiet pride. The narrative had shifted, from helplessness to empowerment, from victimhood to agency. The story of Lorenzo Adams became a testament to resilience, advocacy, and the transformative power of truth, when wielded by those willing to confront injustice directly. Lorenzo's days regained a semblance of normalcy, though the weight of recent weeks lingered. Each morning, he walked through the halls of his high school with a quiet vigilance, the memory of handcuffs and interrogation lingering like shadows. Friends approached cautiously, unsure how to address the ordeal. His debate team, aware of the injustice, rallied quietly, offering support without words, their solidarity a soft balm. The community, energized by protests and media coverage, began to engage more deeply with issues of juvenile justice, systemic bias, and accountability, ensuring Lorenzo's experience catalyzed broader awareness. In his home, family routines resumed, but carried a new gravity. Denise, exhausted but determined, balanced her hospital shifts with advocacy work, co-founding a legal defense fund to assist juveniles facing wrongful charges. Raymond, having used his authority and position to rectify his son's case, continued to oversee systemic reforms from the Attorney General's office, ensuring transparency and fairness in sentencing, body camera inclusion, and public defender workloads. The family had endured trauma, yet each member channeled the experience into purposeful action. Lorenzo returned to debate practice with renewed focus. Every argument, every case study now carried personal weight. He understood the human stakes behind the policies and procedures, the real consequences of systemic failure. His mentors noticed a deeper maturity in his reasoning, a tempered confidence forged through hardship. The state debate championship became more than a competition. It was a platform to articulate lessons learned from injustice, resilience, and advocacy. The media spotlight persisted. Investigative journalists continued to track the systemic changes initiated in response to Lorenzo's case, highlighting reforms, monitoring their implementation, and ensuring the public remained informed. Social media campaigns, educational forums, and community workshops reinforced the narrative that justice requires vigilance and action, not passive observation. Lorenzo's story inspired policy discussions, educational initiatives, and grassroots movements across Virginia and neighboring states. The former officers, judge and prosecutor, faced professional consequences, signaling the system's capacity for accountability when challenged. Granger served his federal sentence, Whitfield was removed from the bench, Hollis was disbarred, Dawson resigned. These outcomes, while delayed, underscored the importance of advocacy, evidence, and ethical responsibility within the legal system. Lorenzo's experience became a case study in law schools, policy institutes, and community programs, illustrating the intersection of power, race, and procedural justice. Despite public attention and institutional changes, Lorenzo faced personal challenges. Sleepless nights, moments of anxiety, and the lingering trauma of incarceration required patience and support. Therapy sessions, parental guidance, and community engagement offered avenues for healing. Each step forward reinforced resilience, teaching Lorenzo that justice is not simply the reversal of a sentence, but the reconstruction of agency, trust, and hope. By the time spring arrived, Lorenzo walked the dogwood-lined streets of Richmond with measured confidence. Petals drifted across sidewalks where he had once carried groceries for neighbors, a quiet symbol of continuity and life's persistence. His debate notebook, restored and intact, now held reflections not just on civil rights and law, but on lived experience. The young man, who had endured false accusation and near lifelong imprisonment, emerged wiser, determined to ensure that others would never face the same injustice alone. The system had faltered, but he had endured and now stood as both witness and advocate. Lorenzo's involvement in community initiatives began to expand. He and Terence organized workshops teaching teens about their rights during police encounters, emphasizing communication, documentation, and the preservation of evidence. These programs grew rapidly, drawing attention from schools, local organizations, and civic leaders. Each session reinforced the lesson that knowledge and preparation are essential tools for empowerment, transforming trauma into proactive education. Lorenzo, speaking from personal experience, became both a teacher and a symbol of resilience. Meanwhile, his mother, Denise, scaled her efforts. The legal defense fund she co-founded rapidly grew, taking on dozens of cases for juveniles facing wrongful charges. The organization focused not only on legal representation, but on mentorship and community engagement, helping young people navigate complex systems and understand their rights. Denise's dual role as a medical professional and activist illustrated the possibility of leveraging personal skills to create meaningful societal change. Raymond continued to drive systemic reforms through his office. Annual reporting of sentencing disparities became a public resource, enabling scrutiny and accountability for judges, prosecutors, investigators, and law enforcement. His advocacy pushed for mandatory racial bias training, transparent reporting procedures, and structured caseload limits for public defenders. The changes, initially localized in Richmond, began to inspire legislation and reform discussions in neighboring states, reflecting the broader impact of one family's intervention. At school, Lorenzo rebuilt trust and confidence. Teachers observed a deeper engagement with civic topics, debate topics now enriched by his lived experiences. His peers responded with respect, inspired by his resilience. The state debate championship became a highlight, not merely for accolades, but as a platform where Lorenzo articulated his understanding of justice, fairness, and accountability. His speech underscored the principle that systems must be actively monitored to serve their intended purpose, and that advocacy is a civic responsibility. The media continued to document the unfolding reforms, producing stories on the legal consequences faced by Granger, Hollis, and Whitfield, and highlighting the systemic deficiencies that had almost condemned a boy unjustly. Public response remained strong, reinforcing the narrative that oversight and accountability are critical in maintaining societal trust. Lorenzo's story became emblematic, appearing in educational materials, policy discussions, and youth programs, bridging the gap between personal experience and structural reform. Within the Adams family, evenings on the porch became a ritual of quiet reflection. Conversations were minimal, yet the shared presence offered comfort and solidarity. Raymond and Lorenzo sometimes spoke of law, policy, and advocacy. Other times, they simply watched the sun set, allowing the natural world to provide a grounding counterpoint to the intensity of the preceding months. Denise joined when her schedule permitted, creating a familial space of safety and emotional repair. The community around Lorenzo remained attentive. Petitions, social media campaigns, and local organizing efforts sustained momentum for reform. Lorenzo's advocacy extended beyond workshops, influencing local legislation and school policies. His personal narrative, intertwined with systemic critique, became a powerful tool for education and social change. The young man who had faced injustice now guided others, ensuring the lessons learned were embedded in both hearts and policies, demonstrating the transformative potential of resilience coupled with action. Spring turned to summer, and Lorenzo's life gradually regained a sense of rhythm. His days were a blend of school, debate practice, and community engagement. Yet beneath the surface, he carried the memory of incarceration, the distrust it had sown, and the resilience it had forged. Each interaction, whether mentoring a younger student, participating in a debate, or speaking at a workshop, was informed by his lived experience, a nuanced understanding of the fragility and importance of justice. Terence, once terrified and bloodied on the sidewalk, became an active partner in Lorenzo's initiatives. Together, they designed sessions for local schools on civil rights and lawful conduct during police interactions. The workshops were practical, teaching teens to ask questions, record encounters, and remain composed, transforming fear into preparedness. Their message was clear: knowledge and awareness can mitigate risk, yet systemic reform is essential to prevent future injustice. The Adams family continued their advocacy work. Denise, balancing hospital shifts with the Legal Defense Fund, became a recognizable figure in local media, advocating for juveniles and systemic transparency. Her work demonstrated that professional expertise can be leveraged for social impact, connecting healthcare, community advocacy, and justice. Raymond implemented policies ensuring transparency in sentencing, oversight on public defenders' caseloads, and mandatory racial bias training, creating measurable structural change across Virginia. At school, Lorenzo found a sense of purpose in his academics and debate. His presentations now incorporated personal testimony, connecting legal principles to lived experience. The state debate championship served as a platform for him to articulate lessons about fairness, accountability, and systemic oversight. His delivery was poised, informed, and unshakable, earning a standing ovation. The accomplishment symbolized more than victory. It was an assertion of agency and a reclamation of voice that had been threatened by unjust processes. The media continued to amplify Lorenzo's story, highlighting the consequences faced by Granger, Hollis, and Whitfield, while also reporting on the systemic reforms implemented. Social engagement, public protests, and policy discussions sustained momentum, demonstrating that personal stories can catalyze widespread institutional change. The narrative was no longer solely about one boy. It had become a touchstone for discussions on justice, fairness, and civic responsibility. Evenings on the Adams family porch became rituals of quiet reflection. Conversation was optional, presence and support were sufficient. Lorenzo and Raymond sometimes spoke of law and policy. Other times, they simply observed the neighborhood's rhythms, allowing time and nature to restore equilibrium. Denise occasionally joined, completing the familial unit and offering warmth and reassurance that the trauma had not eroded. Through advocacy, education, and systemic reform, Lorenzo transformed the injustice he endured into a blueprint for community empowerment. His experience, once a symbol of systemic failure, became a catalyst for awareness, legislative action, and societal reflection. As the months progressed, the boy who had faced life without parole emerged not only as a survivor, but as a voice and leader, committed to ensuring that the lessons of his ordeal reached others who might face similar challenges. His journey illustrated that resilience, coupled with advocacy and truth, can generate lasting, meaningful change. By autumn, Lorenzo's influence in Richmond had grown. Students across the city attended his workshops, local media covered his advocacy, and policymakers began consulting him on juvenile justice initiatives. His lived experience lent authenticity to every presentation. His calm, precise explanations demonstrated the power of knowledge coupled with personal testimony. Terence remained by his side, a constant reminder of shared hardship and mutual resilience, each reinforcing the other's commitment to justice. The legal system continued to feel the effects of Lorenzo's case. Officer Granger served his sentence, permanently banned from law enforcement. Brenda Hollis faced civil and professional consequences for her role in suppressing evidence, and Judge Whitfield's removal and ongoing federal investigation set a precedent for accountability at the judicial level. The public defender system underwent auditing and restructuring, ensuring no single attorney would be overburdened and unable to provide adequate defense again. The Adams family's intervention had rippled through multiple layers of government, creating structural safeguards for the future. Lorenzo's daily life slowly regained normalcy. Schoolwork, friendships, and debate regained prominence, but the past lingered as a subtle reminder of fragility and injustice. He approached life with heightened awareness, navigating social and institutional structures with care, understanding the stakes inherent in every interaction. His presence at the debate podium became a symbol of perseverance, translating complex legal and social concepts into accessible lessons for peers, educators, and community members alike. Evenings on the porch provided both sanctuary and reflection. With a glass of lemonade, Lorenzo and his father observed the neighborhood as the sun set, allowing a quiet respite from public attention and activism. Denise, when able, joined, completing a space of safety, reflection, and family cohesion. These moments reinforced a fundamental lesson. Resilience and action coexist, providing both emotional sustenance and practical empowerment. Community initiatives expanded beyond immediate neighborhoods. Lorenzo's workshops inspired student-led campaigns, advocacy networks, and inter-school collaborations. The focus on civil rights education, understanding legal obligations, and navigating law enforcement interactions became institutionalized in local curriculum, reflecting the tangible impact of one young person's experience. The narrative shifted from personal injustice to systemic awareness, embedding lessons into collective consciousness. The broader societal impact was evident. Policies implemented in Richmond influenced neighboring jurisdictions, with body camera mandates, oversight of judicial disparities, and public defender support structures adopted regionally. Advocacy groups cited Lorenzo's experience as a catalyst, demonstrating the importance of intervention and systemic monitoring. His journey transformed from a story of near tragedy to a blueprint for advocacy, education, and reform. As months passed, Lorenzo's confidence and voice solidified. The boy who had been silenced by handcuffs and judicial apathy now spoke with authority, guiding others to understand and navigate complex systems. His personal narrative became inseparable from his activism, ensuring that the lessons of injustice remained alive in education, policy, and community engagement. Each step forward reinforced the potential of informed, courageous action to transform both individual lives and institutional frameworks. Winter approached Richmond, but the Adams family's focus remained on advocacy and education. Lorenzo continued leading workshops, now addressing not only his peers, but also law enforcement cadets and local officials. He demonstrated how systemic bias operates, the importance of body camera footage, and how procedural safeguards can prevent wrongful arrests. Each session was filled with questions, dialogue, and reflection, empowering attendees to recognize both individual and institutional responsibilities. Terence remained a steadfast collaborator, organizing community outreach, coordinating youth programs, and sharing his own experience to underscore the human impact of systemic failures. Their combined efforts created a sustainable framework for advocacy, emphasizing prevention and awareness over reaction, and turning trauma into collective empowerment. At home, the Adams family integrated reflection with action. Evenings on the porch allowed them to process public attention, plan initiatives, and maintain personal well-being. Denise continued her work at the hospital, balancing the demands of a pediatric surgeon with activism. Demonstrating resilience and leadership, Raymond managed the systemic reforms, ensuring that transparency in judicial and prosecutorial conduct became a permanent feature of the justice system, and not merely a temporary reaction to Lorenzo's case. The broader community began to change. Local schools adopted civil rights education, body camera protocols were standardized, and public defenders received structured support to manage caseloads effectively. Legislative attention turned to oversight and accountability, highlighting the power of a single family's advocacy in influencing policy. Lorenzo's story served as a blueprint for reform, demonstrating the need for vigilance, data-driven assessment, and public engagement in maintaining justice. Despite public success, Lorenzo grappled with the personal impact of his experience. Sleepless nights and moments of anxiety persisted, but therapy, family support, and engagement in community work provided tools for processing trauma. Each small victory, from successful workshops to policy changes, reinforced the possibility of turning adversity into meaningful influence. Spring emerged the following year, dogwoods in bloom along familiar streets. Lorenzo reflected on the journey from near destruction to empowerment. The debate notebook in his hands symbolized continuity and transformation. He had returned to school, embraced leadership roles, and integrated his personal narrative into educational and advocacy work. His journey illustrated that systemic change is possible when resilience, action, and accountability intersect. The story of Lorenzo Adams resonated far beyond Richmond, inspiring youth programs, policy discussions, and community initiatives. Each workshop, speech, and policy reform reflected a commitment to ensuring that no other child would face the same combination of injustice, oversight failure, and systemic bias. His life had been irrevocably changed, but through courage, advocacy, and education, he created lasting influence, embodying the principle that resilience coupled with purposeful action can transform both individual and collective outcomes. As spring advanced, Lorenzo's influence deepened across Richmond. Students, teachers, and local officials engaged with his workshops, learning the intricacies of civil rights, lawful interactions with law enforcement, and the importance of procedural integrity. His lived experience lent authority to every lesson, transforming abstract principles into tangible guidance. Terence continued to serve as co-organizer, ensuring the message reached a broad audience and fostering a network of informed, empowered youth. The Adams family maintained their commitment to systemic reform. Denise's legal defense fund expanded, taking on more cases and mentoring young people facing legal challenges. Raymond's initiatives institutionalized transparency and accountability in the justice system, mandating annual reporting of sentencing disparities, body camera integration, and public defender workload limits. These structural changes became a model for other jurisdictions, illustrating the broader impact of advocacy combined with authority. Lorenzo excelled academically and in debate, using his experiences to inform arguments about justice, fairness, and accountability. His public speaking engagements inspired peers and policymakers alike, emphasizing the necessity of vigilance, evidence, and ethical responsibility. The debate podium became a platform not just for competition, but for education and reform, reflecting the interplay of personal experience and societal impact. Community awareness continued to grow. Media coverage highlighted the consequences faced by Officer Granger, Prosecutor Hollis, and Judge Whitfield, reinforcing public recognition of systemic failures and the importance of oversight. Social media campaigns, youth-led initiatives, and educational programs sustained momentum, embedding the lessons of Lorenzo's ordeal into the cultural consciousness of Richmond and beyond. The Adams family's porch remained a sanctuary. Evenings of quiet reflection allowed for emotional restoration, discussion of ongoing advocacy, and planning of future initiatives. These moments reinforced the importance of family, grounding Lorenzo's activism in love and support. The personal and the public intertwined, creating a balanced foundation for resilience and leadership. Lorenzo's workshops inspired policy discussions, community engagement, and youth activism. The integration of personal testimony with practical education created a sustainable model for preventing injustice and promoting awareness. His narrative became emblematic, demonstrating the transformative potential of resilience, strategic advocacy, and ethical intervention. The boy who had once faced life without parole now guided others, ensuring that no young person would encounter similar systemic failure without knowledge, support, or advocacy. Lorenzo's journey illustrated the profound impact of courage, preparation, and action, showing that personal experience, when harnessed constructively, can drive meaningful societal change and safeguard the principles of justice for future generations. Over the following months, Lorenzo's engagement extended beyond Richmond. Schools invited him to speak on the principles of justice, civil rights, and civic responsibility. His personal story, intertwined with systemic critique, gave young audiences a tangible understanding of institutional power and bias. He emphasized practical tools, documenting encounters, understanding legal rights, and seeking proper representation. Workshops grew into citywide programs with Terrence coordinating logistics and outreach, amplifying their shared message. The Adams family continued to shape policy. Denise oversaw the Legal Defense Fund's expansion, providing both representation and mentorship. Raymond's reforms were codified. Annual reporting of sentencing disparities, mandatory racial bias training, and limits on public defender caseloads. His office released public dashboards, ensuring transparency and creating pressure for accountability. Other states began adopting similar measures, extending the influence of one family's advocacy. Lorenzo's academic path flourished. He maintained exemplary grades and excelled in debate competitions. Each presentation drew from his experiences, connecting abstract concepts to lived realities. The state debate championship became a symbol not only of personal achievement, but of empowerment through resilience and knowledge. The applause he received signified validation, yet the deeper reward was influencing thought and inspiring action among peers and educators. The media sustained attention on systemic failures, highlighting the consequences for Granger, Hollis, and Whitfield. Public awareness of procedural and racial inequities deepened, reinforcing support for reforms. Lorenzo's story became a case study in civic engagement, legal accountability, and community activism, illustrating the impact of individual resilience on societal structures. Evenings on the family porch remained a refuge. Conversations ranged from policy to simple reflections, providing balance and emotional grounding. The ritual underscored the intersection of personal healing and public action, reinforcing the Adams family's commitment to both family and societal reform. The educational and advocacy initiatives catalyzed by Lorenzo's experience inspired youth-led campaigns, policy reviews, and grassroots activism. Schools implemented programs integrating civil rights awareness, legal literacy, and advocacy skills, institutionalizing lessons from his ordeal. Lorenzo's personal narrative became a tool for systemic understanding, ensuring that knowledge, vigilance, and advocacy would empower future generations. Through public engagement, education, and systemic reform, Lorenzo transformed personal trauma into a sustained force for change. His life illustrated the principle that resilience, when coupled with action and truth, can effect meaningful societal reform, bridging the gap between individual experience and institutional accountability. The boy who had once been silenced now commanded attention, guiding others to prevent similar injustice and inspiring a community to act with awareness, courage, and responsibility. As Lorenzo advanced toward the end of the high school, his influence continued to expand. He spoke at community forums, collaborated with civic leaders, and participated in panels on juvenile justice and systemic reform. His personal experience lent credibility to discussions, allowing him to bridge the gap between theoretical policy and lived reality. Terence remained a partner, helping coordinate initiatives, workshops, and youth engagement, ensuring the lessons of their shared experience reached a wider audience. The Adams family continued advocacy at multiple levels. Denise's legal defense fund flourished, mentoring youth, supporting families, and advocating for reform. Raymond's office institutionalized transparency, mandating annual reporting of judicial disparities, oversight of prosecutorial misconduct, and limits on public defender caseloads. These reforms created structural safeguards, ensuring that future cases would be less susceptible to the failures Lorenzo had experienced. Other states began replicating these policies, amplifying the impact of their advocacy beyond Virginia. Lorenzo's academic achievements remained strong, with debate competitions providing a platform to articulate lessons about justice, fairness, and the importance of civic engagement. His public speaking, grounded in personal narrative, inspired peers, educators, and policymakers. The state debate championship became a symbol of resilience and the power of informed advocacy, illustrating that personal experience, when coupled with articulate communication, could influence both hearts and policy. Media attention persisted, highlighting the consequences faced by Granger, Hollis, and Whitfield. The exposure prompted further discussions on accountability, judicial oversight, and systemic bias, reinforcing the relevance of Lorenzo's case. Investigative journalism, combined with social media advocacy, sustained public pressure and ensured reforms were implemented and maintained. Lorenzo's story became a touchstone for discussions on justice and equity, illustrating the potential of individual action to influence broader systems. The Adams family continued to use their porch as a space for reflection, planning, and respite. Conversations ranged from legal policy to simple observations, grounding Lorenzo in family support and continuity. These moments reinforced the integration of personal healing and public action, emphasizing the importance of balance in sustaining advocacy over time. Through workshops, policy reform, and community engagement, Lorenzo's experience evolved from personal trauma into a vehicle for systemic change. He exemplified the principle that resilience, combined with informed action and truth, can transform both individual lives and institutional frameworks. The boy who had nearly been silenced now guided others, ensuring that the lessons learned from injustice remained active in policy, education, and community awareness, creating lasting impact and influence. By the spring following his release, Lorenzo had fully embraced his role as an advocate and mentor. His workshops were attended not only by students, but also by local officials, educators, and aspiring lawyers, each eager to learn from his lived experience. He emphasized the importance of preparation, understanding rights, and the value of evidence, turning his personal ordeal into lessons for systemic improvement. Terence continued as a partner in these initiatives, helping organize sessions and ensuring that young people could access guidance previously denied to them. The Adams family's influence remained widespread. Denise expanded the Legal Defense Fund to address wrongful charges statewide, mentoring youth and supporting families navigating the justice system. Raymond institutionalized reforms across Virginia, ensuring transparency in sentencing, mandatory racial bias training, and limits on public defender caseloads. These measures created safeguards that would prevent future injustices similar to Lorenzo's, and other states began adopting comparable reforms, demonstrating the ripple effect of their advocacy. Academically, Lorenzo excelled, with debate serving as both a personal outlet and public platform. He drew from his experiences to discuss the presumption of innocence, systemic bias, and the ethical responsibilities of those in authority. His presentations won accolades and standing ovations, symbolizing his regained agency and the power of articulate, informed advocacy. His personal story became inseparable from his public voice, inspiring peers and policymakers alike. The media continued to highlight the consequences faced by Granger, Hollis, and Whitfield, reinforcing the public's understanding of systemic failure and the importance of oversight. Investigative reporting, social campaigns, and public engagement ensured that Lorenzo's experience informed ongoing discourse on justice and accountability. His story became a case study for educational programs, legal training, and community initiatives, demonstrating the impact of personal resilience combined with systemic intervention. Evenings on the porch remained sacred for reflection, family conversation, and quiet presence. These moments reinforced the connection between personal recovery and public action, allowing Lorenzo to process trauma while sustaining his advocacy efforts. The simple rituals of family life provided grounding amidst the intensity of public attention and responsibility. Through workshops, policy reform, and educational outreach, Lorenzo transformed his near tragedy into lasting influence. His journey illustrated the potential for individual action to drive systemic change, showing that resilience, informed advocacy, and ethical engagement can reshape institutions and communities. Lorenzo Adams, once silenced by injustice, emerged as a voice, mentor, and leader, ensuring that the lessons of his experience would empower future generations and protect the principles of fairness and justice for all. Months after his release, Lorenzo Adams reflected on the journey that had reshaped his life. The dogwoods along his street were blooming, petals drifting like confetti across the sidewalk where he had once helped neighbors with groceries. His debate notebook lay open on his lap, the old one preserved by Terence, pages dried and intact. Lorenzo had written a single line on the first page of his new notebook. "They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed." He returned to school, quietly attending classes, debates, and workshops, his demeanor calmer, more introspective, but resolute. He competed in the state debate championship, selecting a topic close to his heart: the presumption of innocence and racial justice. Lorenzo spoke for 12 minutes without notes, articulating the intricacies of fairness, accountability, and systemic reform, drawing from his personal experiences. His voice did not shake, his hands did not tremble. Teachers and students alike observed his maturity and depth, a testament to resilience forged under extreme adversity. The standing ovation was not simply for victory, but for the courage and insight he embodied. The Adams family continued to make an impact. Terence became a community organizer, leading youth workshops and Know Your Rights initiatives. Denise co-founded a legal defense fund for juveniles, successfully reducing or dismissing charges in dozens of cases. Raymond, leveraging his office, published annual sentencing disparity reports, ensuring transparency and promoting systemic accountability. Policies inspired by Lorenzo's case were adopted by other states, extending the reach of reform and illustrating the power of advocacy rooted in lived experience. Evenings on the porch became a ritual for the family. Glasses of lemonade, the hum of crickets, and the comfort of shared presence. Conversation was minimal but meaningful. Sometimes they spoke of policy and reform. Other times they simply sat together, the silence itself a form of healing. The porch symbolized continuity, a grounding space amid a life transformed by injustice and redemption. The ripple effects of Lorenzo's ordeal continued to resonate. Prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement officers faced consequences for misconduct. The legal system was compelled to reform. Youth and community programs flourished. Lorenzo's experience became a teaching tool, a narrative of resilience, accountability, and advocacy. The boy who had been silenced became a voice for systemic change, ensuring that future generations would benefit from his trials and triumphs. As Lorenzo looked toward the future, he saw purpose and potential. He intended to study law, not out of obligation, but to ensure that no other child would face the injustice he had endured. His life had been irrevocably altered, but through advocacy, education, and perseverance, he had transformed trauma into empowerment, individual struggle into collective reform. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.